Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, and I'm the owner of the company Horns of Odin. And today I'm joined by Felix Lummer. Felix, first of all, you maybe have the best name of anyone that's ever joined. I love the name Felix. I love it. It's just a great name. I think over here anyway, you don't hear it very often. I don't know how popular it is in Germany.
Oh, I'm not sure. It is, out there. I know at least one other Felix, but I also kind of like it because the other name that my parents would have likely decided on was Lucas. And I don't think that I would have been a good Lucas. I like my name very much.
Yeah, no, Felix it suits you. It's different.
Thank you.
It's certainly not one you hear every day. I don't think I could have rocked Felix. I don't think I would have suited it, but yeah, I'll just stick with Daniel. It works.
Yeah, it's a great name as well.
Yeah, you have to say that.
Yeah, no, I mean really.
No, it is. I do like it. I do like it. Except I always get asked the question, which one do you prefer, Dan, Danny, or Daniel? And I'm just like, I don't care. I think some people, I guess, have preference. I'm saying, I'm not bothered.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there is no really like a shortening or something. It's always been Felix. Mm-hmm. But when I moved to Iceland, they are very fond of, all these kinds of niceties with names, right? You have, for instance, Sigurður becomes Siggi, right? Mm-hmm. Hákon becomes Konni. Jón becomes Nonni. So they are very quick in getting, these kind of cute names for your personal given names. And there are some names which it doesn't really fit. For instance, Bjartur would be one, right? And Felix, I thought, would have been another one where it is somewhere between, not being long enough to be shortened, but also not too short to be elongated, like with Jón, who becomes Nonni, as I said. But there are some Icelanders who call me Felli, which is also a short form for félagi, which means like colleague, pal. So I kind of like it.
It kind of works. It works in two ways.
It works in two ways, exactly. And that's why I like it. And again, you can also refer to me as Felli. I respond to that as well. Dan.
Dan's a good one. Dan's all right. No, I don't mind that at all. It's funny. I have certain people call me different variations, and I know straight away like how to respond depending on
exactly.
Who it is.
At times it gets too formal, right? Because when people address me, sometimes at Felix, it's like, what have I done?
Yeah.
What have I done wrong?
Let's say exactly. That's usually when people call me Daniel, it's like,
yeah. Did they find the thing that I broke? Oh, no.
Yeah. What have you found out? It's like, did my mum find that I replaced the wine with water when I was 14? Which is a true story. I did do that.
Really?
Yeah, I only did it once. We used to have this little wine cabinet in the kitchen, and there's a bottle of wine. I'm sure it wasn't. I didn't grow up from money, so I'm sure the wine was it was just a basic cheap bottle of wine, but it was corked and had like this little paper tape that went over the top of the cork. So I got a hairdryer and warmed up the glue to take the little paper thing off and got the cork out, drank the wine, filled it back up with water, and somehow managed to get the cork back in there, put the paper back on, put it back in. And I don't know whether they ever found out. It was never mentioned to me, but maybe they never drank it. It was just a display bottle of wine, maybe.
Yeah. Well, a prime example of resourcefulness there.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have been able to pull this off.
No, maybe my oldest sister had done it before me, and I just drank watered down wine already.
That might be.
It could have been that. Okay, Felix, let the people know kind of maybe who you are, what you do, what you specialize in, what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. My name is, as Dan has introduced me already, it's like Felix. I have a PhD in Old Nordic religion and belief from the University of Iceland. This is also where I am currently situated, although it doesn't look like much, but I'm in Iceland. And I started studying in Germany and with the University of Göttingen. It was like a 2-subjects bachelor in Scandinavian studies and history, although I wrote my BA thesis in Scandinavian studies. On a story which is part of the topic that we are talking about, which is Evain or Even Saga in that instance. And then I had an exchange year, Erasmus, here in Iceland. And kind of never left, really. Went on to study Old Nordic religion and belief as a master's with Terry Gunnell, and then my PhD. And other than that, that is basically what I specialize in, Old Nordic religion and belief. I am teaching the course at the university as well on Old Nordic religion and belief. So
you said before that you're kind of in the role of not replacing Terry, but teaching his classes, am I right? Or kind of in that transition phase.
Yeah, right. I think the appropriate term to use would be like an external expert, right? So I'm not affiliated with the university per se, but I'm brought in to teach that class.
Oh, okay. So that has to be, like I say, that has to be quite terrifying, because Terry Gunnell is one of the kind of legends of this whole kind of topic. He's one, there's a few names that stand out. You obviously have Terry Gunnell, Neil Price, Jackson Crawford. They're just names who have kind of transcended maybe a little more into popular people, or the average layperson would maybe pick up on their names.
Right. That is why I think it is kind of interesting that I come from a German background, and especially in the bachelor's, you read a lot of German scholarship. You're not that readily or that much exposed to things written in Scandinavian or in English, or at least I personally wasn't. So when I came here and I started studying and did my master's under the auspice of Terry, as I said, people were like, "Oh, with whom are you doing your master's?" And I was like, "Yeah, with Terry Gunnell." People were like, "Oh, with Terry Gunnell? You are a student of Terry Gunnell's?" And I'm like, maybe I should do some research on who that is. And I'm thinking, who's supervising me. And then it dawned on me. But yeah, I think it helped a bit that I had this very naive perception. It's like, oh, it's just like Terry, right? And I got to know him as Terry and not as the Terry Gunnell that everybody's referring to.
But yeah, Terry and not Mr. Gunnell.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that helped quite a lot in that instance, yes. Yeah. But sure, large boots to fill, obviously. So far, I've been very happy to not have been thrown to the wolves, in a sense, alone. I've always had a colleague, but that might change now with 2024. Oh, so
it's exciting.
Yeah. Bottom up your shirt. And
that's it. I know you are very, I think we spoke about this before, you are very smartly dressed, which is appreciated.
I felt the need. I'm sorry if I overdressed.
No, absolutely not. Never apologize. Like I say, I need to take a leaf out of your book next year. No. Next week, I might come in a button-down shirt and tie as well.
Oh no! What have I done?
No, you have done nothing. No, I don't think I wear them at only certain occasions. But I like that. I like the. I don't know, because do you wear like a shirt for teaching on a daily basis?
Not really. I mean, I just a sweater at times. Other times I'm also there, in a shirt and a tie. It depends. Yeah. It's not really too formal at times.
Yeah, because I think obviously I have a job where I get dusty. I make drinking horns for a living, so I only wear a suit and a shirt and tie at special occasions. It's a very nice thing for me. It's different. I get to dress up. Whereas, when people wear them day in, day out for their day job, I think maybe loses that kind of charm when you do get to maybe get a little bit more formal.
Yeah, I would reckon it certainly does. Yes. So that's why I sprinkle it in times to feel, like extra fancy, extra petty, but
yeah. Okay, so the topic we're going to talk about today, I'm not going to try and pronounce it, so we'll let you do it justice.
Right. It would be the Riddarasågur, or chivalric romances, sagas of knights, if you want to be verbatim.
Mm-hmm.
And more precisely, that would be then the translated Riddarasågur, because there are, depending on how you want to categorize things, like two kind of different saga corpora in a way.
Okay. So I feel like I've been saying this a lot on the podcast recently, that I like when I get topics that I know nothing about. And this is certainly one that I never even heard of until we booked this, and I got my little sheet through to say what we were talking about. I was like, oh, what are these?
What are these? Yeah, it's kind of a saga corpus, if you like. Trying to tiptoe around the word genre here.
Okay.
That covers, again, depending on what narratives you want to include, but maybe we can talk about that later down the line. Arthurian material and continental, obviously. So for the most part, it will be translated, adapted, redacted, works from Old French mostly. But again, depending on how broad you want to cast your net, you could also take some English or Middle High German narratives in there. Mm-hmm. But then again, it is very fluid, right? It is very complicated. I think as you like, it's not that easy.
Yeah. I mean, pretty much everything is whatever we talk about on here, it's always complicated. I mean, are there any characteristics that just make, I'm going to call them night sagas?
Yeah.
Night sagas. Are there kind of like any structural bullet points that like they have to hit these points to be classified?
Well, I mean, yeah, to a certain extent, obviously their translated nature. And obviously to another extent, the material that they are dealing with. And again, that would be the translated Riddarasågur. Because later on, when you are, like the 13th, 14th century, you get a kind of type of literature which is called in Old Icelandic Riddarasågur, which is kind of nice that we finally have, one of these terms that define some sagas as Riddarasågur, which are lying sagas. The German term would be Märchensagas. The English term would be indigenous Riddarasågur. So there you get it, right? They are of an Icelandic provenance. And they are, in a sense, influenced, or they emerge through influences, basically a convergence of Riddarasågur, the legendary sagas, and the Riddarasågur. So you have like two different kinds of sagas, types of sagas that converge and spawn a new kind of saga literature, which is obviously very interesting. Not really my forte, so I try to keep it with the translated Riddarasågur in this podcast, if you don't mind.
Okay.
But yeah, that would be one of these things, right? They are translated in nature. Mm-hmm. The material is something that you would call like meta of France, meta of Britain, continental.
So when you say translated, does that just mean that there was an original story and then it's been translated into Icelandic or Old Norse?
Yes, that would be the short answer.
Okay.
The long answer is, again, it is a bit more complicated because obviously translation is not something that is very easy. Because you have to think about it. If I translate, do I translate sense or do I translate verbatim? How much does the translator, want to impact on the narrative? How much liberty does he take? And obviously something when it comes to, say, concepts that are not inherently understood in the source, in the target culture that you're translating into, how do you go about it, right? Do you just leave it as it is? Do you try to, in a sense, adapt it into your culture so that the readers understand what it is? Or do you just like leave it as is and explain what it is? There are certain types of translations that can go on. So when these sagas were translated, obviously you have an old French source material.
Okay. Yeah.
And then they obviously get translated depending on how early they are, either into Norwegian and then into Icelandic or straight into Old Icelandic. That might obviously be a reason that we do not have any Norwegian intermediary left. Unfortunately, we have very few Norwegian manuscripts of these sagas surviving. But
are they all written? Because obviously we have a big, long-standing like oral, like oral tradition for sagas. Do they move orally and then written, or are they taken from a written source originally and then to a written source? Does that make sense?
In a sense, the old French material is certainly written in rhyme form, right?
Okay.
So it is, in a sense, intended to be remembered and maybe even performed orally, right? There is something happening there. The rhyme schematics obviously support oral transportation of matter. When it comes to the sagas, obviously one major thing that they alter when they are translating is they do away with the rhyme and they form it into prose.
Oh, okay.
That does not necessarily mean that there is no, oral transmission beforehand, because somehow these stories need to travel, right? People need to get to know of these stories and say like, okay, this is a good story, so I think people might want to read about it and hear about it. And you kind of cheeky touched into a different kind of aspect, right? What are they for? What is their intent, right? Because there is a lot of work that goes on when you have things translated. You need somebody who speaks or understands the languages, who can write, and obviously who knows these manuscripts. And then you are left with the questions like, why are you translating this material?
Like I say, there has to be some purpose, I guess, whether it's for entertainment or maybe just for like a moral message. But it seems like a big effort to translate them. Particularly if they're not going to be. You said about the rhyme aspect of the original one would tend to mean that it would be performed. So if they're put into prose, does that usually mean that they wouldn't be performed and they would just be read? That's never a question I've really thought of before, but
one aspect, at least in Iceland, that we have are the so-called kvöldvökur, the evening wakes, where, during winter, dreaded winter, you have a lot of time indoors because A, it's very cold outside, and B, you do not have that many daylight hours, right? So what you would do then is, while, you repair your fishing net, or the women might be doing some weaving or what have you. You get people that are reading, but they are not reading to themselves only. Obviously, they would read out aloud.
Okay.
And these kvöldvökur are a tradition that goes on, that continues into the 19th, maybe even the early 20th century. So I don't see why this might not have been the case then.
So. I just got me thinking, I guess we spoke about this a lot last week, about how we kind of forget the human aspect of these peoples, because, and we're talking about 800 years ago in this case, and you just forget, like I say, you forget to humanize them. And that just got me thinking how you'd have different families maybe reading these stories, and some of the, let's be stereotypical and say like the dad's reading the story, and maybe you sometimes you get a fun dad and he's going to perform it and he's going to really kind of entertain everybody. But sometimes you may have somebody who doesn't do that and they just kind of read it word for word.
Yeah.
And I could just, I don't know, I could just imagine that kind of happening.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, again, coming back to the translation part, right? How much liberty do you take with the translations? There are certain ideas, certain notions that you see that are either misunderstood or that do not really, cling on in a sense, because the environment isn't really there to support these ideas, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of these ideas would be, if you think about Arthurian literature, right? King Arthur, you might know some of his knights, right? But one of the key defining things that they're having is their round table.
Yeah.
Now, sitting order in a hall structure, in a king setting or in a yard setting, or maybe even in Iceland, with the Goldar, with the chieftains there, where you sit and how close you sit to the chieftain or to the ruler is very important. So obviously the idea of a round table doesn't really make sense. Not everybody is equal. So why do you want to translate this kind of idea? And in fact, the round table is, I think, mentioned once in the entire corpus. So it's just like, these are the things that do not, that doesn't catch on.
It is such a famous part of it, just to have a round table. But it also makes sense to me, because you see these big long tables and the king or the chieftain sits at their head, and then, like you say, the most important sit closest. But if we've all been out for dinner with friends, and if you're like 3 people down, then you may as well just be sat with another group of people. You're talking to the people in front of you and next to you, and you're just not talking to the people further down. Whereas obviously if you have a round table, everybody's looking at each other and it's more inclusive, and you kind of can maybe strategize better.
Right, but with regard to the Arthurian knights, it's obviously this: everybody is equal, but then you have the king who is as equal but still a bit more equal, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of this dichotomy where everybody is equal, but not everybody is as equal as everybody assumes they are.
Yeah.
You have a better equal and a lesser better equal in a sense.
Yeah, the king has his favorites.
Yeah, right. And this is again something that socially would not have really resonated, I would think. And another thing would be castles. Have you ever been to Scandinavia?
Yes.
Have you seen the enormous castles, right? Huge.
Right? Yeah, they don't really have them like we
castles,
do.
I should add. Yeah, exactly. They don't do castles as you do, or even we Germans did, right? So when
you guys have a lot of castles.
Yeah, we have. I mean, even my hometown of 10,000 people has a castle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is something that gets translated. So the word kastali for castle or chastel, it is there and it gets used. But the way in which they describe for the most part is like a longhouse.
Okay.
When you really read it and how it is described, yes, okay, maybe they have a garden around it. And maybe they have some marble stepping stones in front of it. But really, you get the idea. It is just like a larger longhouse in a sense. And again, this is something that socially, historically, is something that we also do not really see. I mean, for my PhD writing about this, I've read a publication. I'm, working from memory here, so my memory might be a bit off. So apologies for any inaccuracies here. But Sweden, for instance, in the 13th century, when these sagas get translated initially, in a sense, if they had castles akin to what you would understand as a castle, something like that, would most likely be a wooden structure that then would last for roughly half a century, depending on the maintenance, obviously. And then they would just rebuild it or repair it or just give it up. So obviously these huge stone buildings is something that doesn't really work.
I've never really thought of it in that way. Would they know, would it be typical knowledge of like what a castle is in what we know? Because obviously, I'm a Brit, you're German, and we know castles. We grew up around castles. There are castles everywhere. And most of them started life as wooden castles and then at some point became stone. But we just know what a castle is. Now, I didn't think of it if you grew up in Iceland or Norway, maybe you just would they know, like, if they see castle, would they go, oh, that's a stone because I've never seen one. So would they know what it is?
Exactly. And that is, again, back to your one of your earlier questions, right? What is the purpose of these things? You said entertainment, and that is something that has been proposed, right? These are fun stories. You love to read about a knight that, saves a lion from a dragon, and then the lion becomes his tame partner in crime, in a sense, and they, reclaim the knight's earlier lost honor and such. Obviously, these are fun stories. You want to read about them. Yeah, obviously, I want to read about a lion, fighting off a dragon. So this is awesome. Mm-hmm. But another thing that has been proposed is, for instance, education, right? So I haven't really touched upon it. There is a Norwegian king called Håkon Håkonason, and he was born, I think, in 1204 and ascended to the throne in 1217, if my memory serves me correctly, and then I think died in 1263, guessing here. And he was one. He was the king who either commissioned or at least oversaw some of the first translations of this continental material into Old Norwegian, as it were. And that would be Tristram. Maybe the Tristan and Isolde kind of narrative thread, where they are, love struck by a love potion and it ultimately goes horribly wrong. Mm-hmm. And we have a saga. This is one of the few instances which is kind of interesting, because the saga ends by saying that this saga has been translated at the behest of Håkon Håkonason in 1226. Now, the problem then is that the manuscript, the first complete manuscript that we have, is, I think, from the 17th century. So we have like roughly half a millennia of a gap between the first complete saga manuscript. We have some earlier fragments, sure, but the first complete saga manuscript that tells us the 1226 and actually 1226 happening, there are like 500 years-ish, give or take, between. So how much can we trust this, right? Usually it is taken at, somewhat of a face value, because the translator or the compiler quotes with like Broder Robert, like Brother Robert has translated the saga. And the name pops up in another saga somewhat later, where he has ascended, I think, to bishop. So if you think that this was the same, because Robert is not, that common of a name, and it's usually taken to be the same individual, you can roughly gauge, okay, that there might be some authenticity to this dates. And then you are thinking, okay, if a king has interest in having these translated, is there more than maybe just the fun part of it? Is it more than just entertainment? Is it maybe more educational, more social? Is it that the king might provide to his people some kind of literature in which they read about a society which he himself wants to model?
Okay.
So like a template.
And almost like would it be a status thing that he would have these, he can afford to have these translated that I guess nobody else would have? And also I don't know if you might want to put a pin in this question and go back to it after, but I was just thinking back to earlier when you said these would be read. How readily available would they actually be? Because obviously we don't have like a printing press. So how would people how common would copies of it be?
That depends with the narratives, obviously. We have narratives that only survive in 5 manuscripts. Then again, we have narratives that survive in over 30, 35 manuscripts. So there's a huge, or even more even. So there's a huge range in popularity. If the surviving manuscripts tell you something about maybe the extant manuscripts at one point in time, and you say, okay, we have 35 odd surviving manuscripts, add in some number of manuscripts that we lost, that we do not know about, that was a very popular saga. Then again, obviously, it doesn't mean that a saga that we only have 5 manuscripts or 7 or 13 manuscripts surviving from necessarily was less popular. It might just be very unfortunate happenstance of history that, 80 manuscripts just didn't survive. Kind of unlikely, but, still. Certain sagas, very popular. Yes, very popular.
So when you say 35 feels like a lot.
Yeah.
Just in a sense of obviously the population. I assume these are they all in Iceland?
In that instance, I think it was Patalopa saga, so that would mostly be in Iceland. There might be one in Norway, but again, I'm talking about the memory. But certainly, yeah, but it obviously does not mean that they are all from the 13th century, right? Because they are getting copied and redacted later on. So you have manuscripts from the 13th century, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th century. Yeah. So there's a broad band. We are talking about a couple of hundred centuries here, right? And not a couple hundred, couple of hundred years.
Yeah.
Not 100 centuries.
No. I mean, that would be something.
Yeah.
So I was thinking of them all existing at the same time and just been passed around between people and out.
They are currently all existing at the same time. So obviously, So that point certainly holds true. But they might have trickled in, throughout the centuries, right? You might start off with one manuscript, obviously, then you have like 2, 3, then like 5 or 6, and then you might end up in 10, 15, and maybe one gets lost. It's always a back and forth.
Yeah.
In that vein, obviously, it is interesting to say that although for the most part we have identified the Old French templates, or again, English and Middle High German, depending on how, again, broad you want to cast your net, none of the extant or the currently existing Old French manuscript that we have is the exemplar, like the model after which the sagas that survive have been copied. It is a bit unfortunate. Obviously, it would be nice to go, I don't know, into the National Library of France and be like, this is the manuscript that served as a copy, is like the exemplar, the model after which I don't know, Riddarasågur had been translated, or something like that. That would obviously be great. But we unfortunately don't have that.
Okay, so I guess you just have to assume that it was taken from.
Well, I mean, you don't necessarily have to assume. In certain instances, it's quite obvious where the story comes from. But yeah, certainly at times it leaves you wondering, it's like, what are the intermediary steps? Because obviously, as I just told you, it's like you start off with one manuscript, which is called the archetype. And from that one, it gets copied. And then the copy gets copied. And then the copy of the copy gets copied. So you're basically left ultimately with a very strange looking family tree, in a sense, of manuscripts.
Will they be changed from copy to copy, or will they be copied word for word?
That is a thing. Not always. Not always is it, word by word. Sometimes things get omitted. Sometimes things get added. Certainly. It's not always as slavishly word for word, but it's a fairly great job. All of everything considered. One thing, for instance, which is interesting is that we have a Percival's saga, like the saga of Percival. And that is obviously the Holy Grail narrative cycle. And the Old French author, which we know by name, he is Chrétien, or was rather, obviously he's dead now, Chrétien de Troyes, unfortunately, he passed away before he finished his Le Conte du Graal, as it is called in French, like the story of the Grail. So what the Old Norse, some, translator or compiler, however you want to call it, they basically finished the story.
Okay.
So in a sense, you're not left hanging, but you get a finish to the story, which you otherwise would not had. But obviously, this is something then unique to the Old Norse, because it's obviously the Old Norse finish to that narrative. Also very interesting. Sorry.
How do they do it justice in the finishing of it, or is it very obviously different? Do you get the end of the original and it just kind of changes?
No. I mean, obviously they take effort to blend in and make it as seamless as possible. Sure. But again, with Password Saga, it's very interesting because it revolves around the Grail, which is obviously this magical object that the entire story revolves around. And this is again tying back to translating and maybe the social or the teaching aspect of it, because they translate obviously the Grail and the Grail scene, but they do it in a very interesting way because they call it gangandi Graile, which means like walking refreshment, which is very odd, which in a sense tells you it's like you have this beautiful scene, right? Parzival is in a room, and there are a lot of these young persons bearing, a sword, and then obviously the Grail, and then the spear, and so on and so forth. And they move past him without noticing him, without saying a thing, and he's wondering about what this is. And obviously the Grail is some sort of drinking vessel, right? And it is very interesting to see because it is born, in a sense, carried past Parzival, and it is a vessel with some liquid in it. They just went like, oh yeah, that surely works, right? Walking refreshment. Let's go with that. I think that makes sense. Yes, sir. I do understand what a Grail is. Yes.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
I mean, I feel like I've seen some sort of conspiracy theory somewhere that suggests the Holy Grail is a person. I feel like I've seen that. So maybe they were maybe they were the early inspiration for that.
Yeah, I don't know, but it just is interesting to see when you really think about it, how much the social aspect of it, when you have somebody who want these things translated to have, in a sense, a blueprint, that he wants his society to look like, as it were. And then you get like very interesting oddities wrong. It is just like, I really find this amazing. And as we were talking about it before you hit record, it shows the human aspect of these things, right? It brings that so much more to the fore. Because when you do these translations, you always think about, it's like one guy sitting there, maybe in a monastery, hunched over the manuscript, with candle light flickering, something like that. But there are so many more persons involved in translating. It starts off with the commissioner. Somebody has to provide you with the funds to do this because this is expensive. You need the raw material, you need the time, you need persons, to feed them, and so on and so forth. Then you have, depending how many people you need, an X amount of scribes that do the copying. Maybe you want your manuscript to be illuminated, so you need somebody who can draw and paint these illuminations in. You may have somebody who comes in and prepares prepares the raw material, right? Because you need some material to write on. Yeah. Which would obviously be parchment, which is cow skin, goat skin, something like that. So this needs to be prepared. You need lines and rubrication. So you have can maybe do the scribe himself, but maybe you have somebody who can do it for you. Then, they would prick in where the rubrics are. They would draw you the lines on the parchment again. So there are so many people involved in translating these things and adapting them. it is very interesting, the machinations behind these things. It's not just like not one guy, right?
Yeah.
Or two guys.
It shows the importance of having them translated, or at least the need and the want. It's not just frivolous. It's not just because, there has to be a reason why they want this, because
Exactly.
as you wouldn't put that expense into it. And
exactly.
yeah, I mean, when you see things like this where they are with the illuminations, they are stunning. They're not easy. It's not easy to do. It takes a lot of time, and I dread to think how many mistakes and errors must have happened. And I couldn't do it. I even not even just the drawings, the writing itself is always very elaborate.
Yeah, I mean, it is always a bit unfortunate with the Icelandic manuscripts. They are not as illuminated or not as fanciful as their continental counterparts, right?
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, we also have very fancy manuscripts. I'm not sure if you can see it, like there, the picture behind me.
Yeah,
that is one page of Flateyjar book, which is a very, very beautifully illustrated codex.
Mm-hmm.
At least, judging from what we are usually encountering. But yeah.
It does. It really does highlight that importance of wanting to have them done. Okay, so you were talking about Håkon having this translated before, and possibly the reasons, and then I think we got sidetracked us. So yeah, going back to the reasons as to why maybe he would have had this done, whether it was for, I think you touched on the education aspect, and the theater. Is there any other reasons?
I mean, so far, not that I'm aware of. These are usually like the two great theories that are proposed. Either it is fun, or it is some kind of cultural, social reason to have these translated. And there really is no consensus, in a sense, because it might be both at the same time. It might be either or. It is, one of these things where you can very good disagree in a scholarly manner on these kinds of questions, right? It's like, yeah, but I think it might more socially be something like, there might be, he might have more social agenda of it. And then you're like, yeah, but maybe the fun part was really that what made him do these things. Yeah, but you can go very good back and forth on these things. And this is what I find very interesting with this topic, because apart from the translating aspect, it is also this question of impetus, as it were, this question why. And that we do not really have a great answer to it, in a sense, which makes it very appealing to keep on studying this and discuss this. Yeah. At least I find it very appealing when scholarship does not know the answer yet, because that would be quite sad, because then we couldn't talk about it, because we would be definitely sure what the reason was, right?
Yeah, I think that's can be said for all of this sort of time period. It seems like everything to do with like Viking Age, Nordic mythology, the Saga, which is all that. It's all so we have like enough information that it makes a fun conversation, but not enough that you can give definitive answers. And it's just like the same thing that comes up time and time again, that it just allows for these, which is great for me and the podcast, that we get to have these conversations and go, you know what, we don't really know.
We don't really know. Yeah.
But then the listeners get to kind of speculate on their own ideas, because even just in this brief conversation, I've gone, I bet that it's probably just to show off, to be like, this is my social standing. Look what I can do. I can bring these fanciful stories from a land far away, and look how exciting and great I am. Because that's how I think of people. Yeah,
certainly. It is always great also the thing that you can look at the same evidence and come to different conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
because again, this opens up. It's just like, yeah, but how do you come to interpret these things? And then you can say, okay, it's like what I said initially. You want to read about a knight saving a lion from a dragon. This is just great stories, right? I'm having to throw a bit shade now on the sagas of Icelanders, and particular Njál saga, because the incipit of it is just like, oh yeah, a guy has a son by the same name, he has a son by the same name, he has a son by the same name, he has a son by the same name, and then suddenly you're 50 pages in and nothing has really happened.
Oh yeah.
And here you really are left as, oh yeah, by the way, you are at King Arthur's court and some guy is telling a story, and suddenly some other knight feels insulted and goes on a revenge quest. And it's just like, oh, straight into the action. It's like knights, it's fanciful. Maybe it's also a bit exotic because you're not really sure what a castle is, and you're not really sure what a knight is, depending on where you are and what your social standing is, right?
Yeah.
And I think it sucks you in a sense. But then again, you can also say
it could also almost be, I guess, like a fantasy fairy tales type story, because I mean, a lion fighting a dragon is obviously fanciful anyway, but even the things that are real, if they're not common to your everyday person, and some people may have traveled and seen a castle, but I would imagine most people wouldn't have. So then when you hear about these things and these knights dressed in armor, riding on horseback, and it's just like this very fancy thing that you've never seen before, experienced, and you hear about it from this other land that maybe your ancestors used to go to, and it just had this really nice story, I guess.
Certainly. And in a sense, it also brings these distant lands closer to you, because then you can imagine what they are, and when they're in your imagination, they are with you in a sense. So it's transformative in another way, right? Because then you can, if you are not really sure about what the castle looks like, and it's like a long house, but no, it has these fancy add-ons in a sense, then you might just conjure up a world for your own, and that might be for some people something that they seek out. Certainly.
Yeah, and it's because it's in written form as well, everybody's imagination gets to run wild. It's anybody who's sat and read a book and then watched a movie adaptation of that book always goes, oh, well, the book was better. And that's because it's because you created the world in your own mind, and it's how you see it, and no film adaptation will ever live up to that. And it's kind of probably a similar thing with this, where each person, if they drew what a castle was, if they drew what the knight was, and they drew what the dragon looked like, everyone would be individual, and it's kind of this fantastic story. So one question I have is, if we have them writing these stories or translating these stories from kind of, I guess, mainly European base, and you have like the castles and the knights and the dragons, do you see them do they keep it as that, or is there a temptation to kind of weave in like Scandinavian things as well? Do they like add bits to it, to add their own culture into it? Do we see that in like a comparison from the translated one to the original?
For the most part, these translations are very faithful.
Okay.
So they stick to the text for the most part.
Because I'd have just written myself in there. I'd be like, now this really Scandinavian-looking guy comes along and just slays the dragon.
Daniel and slays the dragon.
Yeah,
that would have been epic.
He just comes in and slays the dragon, and he's the hero. Yay!
Yeah, no. Unfortunately, well, I mean, not really unfortunately, but they do a very, very stellar job at being faithful to their source material. Obviously, you have instances where they are not as close, but that again might just be that they are copying from a slightly different source than we've currently existent, right? But you certainly see that there are concepts in Old French that are translated that don't really fit in with what you would expect in the Scandinavian realm. And it either changes subsequent the perception of these beings, or it really doesn't work. And this is now how we can very smoothly segue into the Old Nordic religion part of these things. We have, for instance, in Old French, we have the fairies, the fées, beautiful, magic, otherworldly female figures.
Mm-hmm.
And there are certain narrative tropes associated with them, right? For instance, you are a old French knight, you are strolling around riding your horse in the countryside, and suddenly you see a very beautiful, fanciful young lady standing by a creek near a tree. It is very clear that this is a fairy. I would reckon, I would submit that for the old French, they would know what this image means.
And see, that's so interesting, because even to me now, a fairy is like a very tiny creature.
Yeah, but again, this is then something that in your folklore is, the British Isles folklore might be a bit different in that regard. Mm-hmm. But, with these are female beings, humanoid. They are the same size, usually in the narratives, as, your other females that are encountered. And the knight would then go on to address the fairy in a very particular way, using a very specific set of terms, right? He would go like, oh, my love, my friend, something like that, which shows obviously some intimacy. Mm-hmm. And again, that this being is stood where she is, addressed in a certain way, makes it very obvious that you are dealing here with another worldly figure, another worldly female figure, a fairy. But then you are reading the saga narratives, and they are translating this, but it feels like kind of not really that the sense of this is transported, right? Then they're going suddenly, it's like, oh yeah, my lady, and such. So they try to be as verbatim as they can, or as close to the source as they can, but really it reads kind of odd, because obviously these knights are addressing these female figures in a way different manner that they would address the queen, or a duchess or something like that. And in a sense, this doesn't work really, because when you look at Old Norse mythology, right, where are female fairies? I mean, I can throw this question to you, or just like open, to any listeners. Like, where are female fairies? It is like you have the Aulvar, which are usually translated as elves, mm-hmm. and there aren't really, in the mythology at least, female Aulvar. You have like this one, I think, stanza 13 of Faupnismaul, where you have this odd reference to female elves that are also Nordic, if my memory serves me correctly. But other than that, there might be one apotropaic Latin inscription that has Elvas and Elvors, I think from Jutland, also like the 12th or 13th century. But really, there is not that much evidence of female Aulvar. Mm-hmm. And these very humanoid beings are not translated in that sense. And you have other references where there's a particular instance of a fairy weaving a mantle. It is now Myrtle Saga, which is like the saga of the mantle. It's a very burlesque comedy kind of narrative, where you are at King Arthur's court, and suddenly a strange rider appears. And he says that his lady has sent him to King Arthur's court with this beautiful mantle. And nobody has ever seen a fairer mantle than this mantle. of course. And the lady sends her best regards and says that whoever is the most chaste or the most faithful to her lover may obtain the mantle as a reward. And then obviously the mantle is, everybody wants, every female wants to have the mantle, and then they are all quarreling who wants to be the first, but not really, because they are told, but wait, there is an enchantment, in a sense, placed on this mantle, that if you haven't been faithful to your lover, it will shorten in a very intricate way, where you have, given yourself to other lovers, in which way you have been unfaithful, right? So in a sense,
I bet that room went quiet.
So initially it's like, oh dang, I want that bling bling mantle, and then suddenly it's like, maybe I don't want it after all.
Whoever was talking the loudest, and then suddenly just went, oh yeah, you know what? Actually, I don't really want it.
Exactly, and this mantle is described as being made by a fair, by a fairy, under the earth for some time, and hence it thus explains the intricacy of the weaving, but also how the enchantment got placed on that mantle.
Mm-hmm.
And this one, in this instance, for instance, they translate the fair as Álfkona, which is quite interesting because, again, as I said, there aren't really female Álfar in the mythological record. And then you're getting a 13th century saga that introduces, in a sense, as it were, female Álfar into the mix, not really heard of before, and associated with crafting of usually weaving, which in Old Norse has also, magical connotations, but usually different. I think you are very well aware of this. So it's in a sense, it is not only, translating these narratives, but obviously there is some cultural exchange happening, which affects belief as well. Because again, suddenly you have these mythological beings which almost exclusively appear as male, and then suddenly you're getting a female counterpart, which not really appears prior. And you can, in my PhD, I've looked at these Álfkonur, these female Álfar. I've looked at dwarves, because dwarves appear as well as giants. And these different super and magic, but that is something different. But these three concepts, as it were, they are all affected in a sense different. You get the emergence of the Álfkonur, but then you have dwarves, and in the old French material, at least, dwarves appear in 2.5-ish kind of roles. One is like a little knight, like Gimli, right? Like the petit chevalier, it is called in French, where you would have, basically a nobleman that is dwarvish, small in stature, and is a knight.
Yeah.
1.5-ish might be the retinue, which is then also described as, dwarves, maybe not as dwarf knights, but again, dwarves. And the second one is a treacherous, counselor. Yeah. And the narratives that have been preserved in the sagas that we have usually do not feature these little knights. So there is no counterpart. So for the most part, my research was then focusing on the counselor, the treacherous counselor. And it is interesting to see that this doesn't really work. Yes, you have some treacherous dwarfs, for instance, Rien, I think, comes to mind fairly early on. But that is more, the Sigurd meta The Wölsung Meta is more German in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And you do not really see that many dwarves counseling in the Old Norse. You have your odd one, but then again, you're left to look at the time. When does that appear? Is it prior to the arrival of the translated Riddarasågur, or is it after that? But for the most part, the Old French does not really have an impact on the picture of the dwarves in Old Norse, which is kind of interesting because it shows you that apparently you have concepts that are more susceptible to influence or to amalgamation or to fertilization from the outside, as it were. Whereas you have other concepts that are almost entirely unaltered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you, that kind of goes back to the question that I was wanting to ask before, and I've just held on to it, and that's this idea of, I just assumed, probably wrongly, I assume things wrongly all the time, that when these were translated, they would almost have an overseer, maybe, who, as they go through, would kind of explain the cultural aspects of, and kind of just explain the story to them, as rather than just like translating it word for word, would kind of explain what these different pieces meant, like the fairies, or with dwarves, like they would say, like, this is what they are, and this is kind of what it means to us, and this is why he speaks to her in a certain way. So then they could maybe capture that in the translation, or maybe adapt it to their own culture so it made sense. But it seems like that's maybe not the case, that it's just like, here's the book, here's your empty pages, have at it. just have fun and figure it out as you go along, which is kind of not what I expected.
No, I wouldn't think that there would be necessarily somebody that would explain it to you in a sense.
I thought that would be part of the service. You know, I imagine because I don't know. I feel like they would be. I maybe I've got this all wrong, but I just kind of assumed that they would be, the original would be somewhere important, maybe in like a castle in France, and somebody would come over from Iceland or Norway, and they would maybe pay some money or give like a gift for the pleasure of being able to translate this story out of the book. And as part of that service, you would get a little person who translates it, who explains it for you. There would be like a probably a religious figure there who kind of just let you know what's happening.
We have like Brother Dan. He has booked the 5-star.
Yeah, it's like a package. It's a package deal. Yeah, you get like a package deal, and maybe if they bring a shit gift, then you don't get Brother Dan who explains it for you. But it's like you're on your own. There you go. But if you bring something good, you get the little man who helps you understand it.
Well, you inadvertently touched upon a very interesting question. It's like, how did the process of translating be initiated, right? Because you can think of, in a sense, like various possibilities. One you just explained, right? I go somewhere where the book is, and I copy it or translate it, or I do the work that is asked.
Yeah.
The other thing is, for instance, the book is on loan somewhere, and you go to somewhere else. This is like, in a sense, like the middle kind of thing.
Okay.
And another possibility would be the book travels to you.
Oh,
right.
See, I feel like these books would be so important. This again, this is just like my mindset. Of like, I just assume these books would be so important that it's like, well, it's just staying here. We're not lending this to anybody.
Yeah, I mean, there obviously are scholars that think you travel to the book. There are others that think the book travels to you. I would also be firmly in the former part, because in a sense, if you die on your way, if you drown, if you get killed in a robbery or something like that, it is bad luck, tough luck on you, right? But the book is safe. And in some areas, obviously, the copy that might be in the monastery is the only copy that is available in, that part of the country, maybe even. So obviously there is some significance to these books. And as you said, like, would you hand that away? Especially if you think about either religious works or maybe even legal texts, right? If this is the only copy of a legal text for your county or for your district, are you handing that out? Are you sending that away?
And it's
Really?
and I imagine it's not just for a couple of days either. You know, it takes a while to travel back then.
Yeah, but also it takes a while to work on this book.
Oh,
in which case it might not be readily accessible to you or to either party, right? Either it prolongs your stay, in which case maybe your commissioner runs out of funds or doesn't want to pay you anymore because he assumes you're dead. I don't know, what have you. Or on the other hand, because it is with you, it cannot be used in its intended function, which might also be a detriment then. So I would think that you are more expendable than a book. But again, others might disagree.
Yeah, I feel like definitely the people were more expendable because I imagine especially when they're very ornately decorated, I just can't see them wanting to move those around. I wouldn't want to. I'd be like,
no,
hey, it's all right.
I'm the same. It's like when people ask me, it's like even today, it's like, can I borrow a book? And it's like, yeah, okay, you can borrow the book, but really no.
Well, that's a very good point because you have we have books. Well, all of us have books, and they may cost £10, £20, and when somebody asks to borrow it, you're still like, I'm not sure because when am I going to see it again? Are you going to bring it back? Please make sure you bring it back. And then you're chasing them for it and saying, where's my book? And 5 years down the line, you remember, oh shit, so-and-so's still got my book.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about one of these books that I assume it's not priceless, but it's probably not far off with the amount of work that goes into it. And if it's the only one in a certain area, the difficulties of then getting another copy, it's not easy. Particularly if somebody's just like, no, I don't want to bring that back. It's my book now. Why would I copy it when I could just keep this one?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I haven't ever thought about this. It's like, oh yeah, very sorry, your book got lost on the way. It's like, oh yeah, FedEx didn't. I'm very sorry. It's like, yeah, oopsie.
Yeah, and
then sneakily just have it, right?
Yeah, how would they know? How would they know that? People do it today with delivery people all the time. I have an e-commerce business. I always get people who are just like, oh yeah, it's gone missing. I'm like, but has it? Has it though? And I'm like, because the little tracking number says that it got there, but the delivery man will have signed for it himself, and it just causes me a headache. But obviously, even then, you had none of that, and robberies. I'm sure. Well, robberies on the road did happen. So, what's to say that you're just like, oh yeah, some barbarians came and stole it and used it for firelighters?
Yeah, for toilet lecture. I don't know. It's just like
sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, we can't. Yeah, like what can we do here? But secretly you're just like, yeah, I've got the original.
Exactly. Yeah. Hence again, that's why I'm in the former field. It's like you travel, or you have a person, or maybe even two. I don't know. Travel to where the book is and have it copied there. It's a much more safer environment for every party involved. Obviously, a part of the traveler, but that is then again tough luck.
Yeah, and I guess that's his job. You mentioned before that sometimes if they run out of money, they wouldn't get finished. So is that why we end up with like part manuscripts? Where like does that happen quite often? Where there's just like, this is taking too long, we don't have the funds, or maybe I don't know, maybe the king dies or changes hands, or and they
that was just like me. That was really just conjecture. If I have to be honest, that was me thinking about possibilities that could have happened.
Oh, okay. I just wondered whether we had like examples of like a half-finished book or manuscript, and we're just like, oh, maybe they just ran out of money.
No, I mean, but what we have though is that we have manuscripts in which the scribe changes in certain intervals, in which we clearly know for historical facts that a person either died or left the country, and then the work was either continued or even finished when they were abroad and unable to work. So obviously we have that. We have also instances where we have scribes that come specifically to write a shorter story. So apparently you could also have specialists that specialize in one or two narratives, and they've copied that so many times, they know it by heart, that they then are brought in a sense to write that. So there are various options why the hand is changing, why the spelling is different or some sort. Yes, certainly. But I'm not sure if there's. I think it would be hard to differentiate, whether or not the money ran out, whether or not the scribe died, something like that.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if we have instances of that. I really can't have. I don't have any authority on that. I don't know.
Yeah. That's fair enough. Okay. Before we wrap up, when I was reading, doing a little bit of research prior, I read, and you're gonna be able to tell me if this is true or not. That when these, this is from Wikipedia, so it might not be true. It might not be true. Don't hold me to it. That when these were translated by the Scandinavians or into Old Norse, that when it came to like the love scenes and the naughtier side of these stories, that they just kind of left them out or didn't put them in, and maybe kind of like dulled down the exciting aspects of them sometimes. Is that the case? 'Cause I guess everybody has this idea of like this modern idea of the Vikings being all wild. And I know we're talking like after the Viking Age, but people have like this opinion of Scandinavia as like this very kind of I guess Rocco just woke up. This idea of Scandinavia having like this kind of, I don't know, just being very free. So then when I was reading that, I was like, oh, that kind of maybe people would think that's the opposite of what would happen.
To some extent, you have within the models, right, within the Old French, say, the love scenes typically follow a certain social conduct, right? There are certain rules to this. Some stories feature larger love scenes or more love scenes in general, right? But certainly there are, in a sense, rules of engagement, right? Which is all this kind of idea of courtly love, amour courtois. Minne would be the Middle High German word. So there is a social order to how you woo and how you love and such, which is again something that might not have been so easily transported into the Old Norse. There are certain narratives, for instance, the Tristan matter, right, which revolves around, which is basically a love story, right, just gone wrong. And there are certain scenes, but not really, that explicit, because again, you have certain social rules, right? So you have Tristan and Isolde, and Isolde is married to Tristan's uncle, but because of the love potion, Tristan loves Isolde, and Isolde loves Tristan. But unfortunately, Isolde is married to, I think his name is Peter. And they, at one point in the narrative, flee into the woods. And they are hiding in their little hideout, a hut, very small hut in the woods. And what they are doing is they're obviously loving each other, burning desire, but they put a sword between themselves when they sleep. And so they are found. And what the search party reports back to Peter is then obviously, yeah, we found them. Yes, they lay next to each other. There was a sword in the middle, so we think nothing really happened.
Imagine it was that easy.
Yeah, imagine it was that easy. Yes. So obviously, in good faith, the sword obviously indicates that nothing happened, and they are
Nobody
so
can
pure.
pass the sword.
Exactly, nobody can pass the sword. And in obviously in fulfilling their courtly love, their courtly role, they do not transgress and such.
Mhm.
So obviously, you have the same in Tristram Saga, but again, because of this courtly love and the courtly rules that are associated with it, they are translating it, certainly, but it doesn't get that explicit. Other narratives are way more explicit, but in a sense subliminal, if you catch my drift.
Okay.
So we have, for instance, Partalopa Saga, which revolves around the knight Partalopi, obviously, and his, I guess, exploits, adventures. And through, during the narrative, he happens to come across the court of a so-called Meikongur, like a female who has no male relatives and thus ascends to the throne, which is, not really how it's supposed to be, which is like a narrative trope. And the thing is that he can't see her, so she is invisible to him. But he gets into her castle, or, palace rather, because she becomes the Empress of Constantinople, of course. Mm-hmm. And so there's this huge castle. It's completely empty. He hears noise, he hears chatter, he hears laughter, everything, but nobody's home. But there is like a floating candle, and he follows the candle, and the candle leads him to the bedchamber. And he lies obviously in the bed, and suddenly he is like, oh, there's somebody beside me, but he can't really see. And then suddenly he feels like, oh yeah, this is a female.
Okay.
And yeah. And the saga then becomes fairly, explicit about not really the sexual act, but the implied, ultimately the implied rape, as it were.
Okay.
So you get at times, it is not written as such, it is more like, oh yeah, it's just like, I will dominate you or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Read between the lines what this means if she doesn't really want to.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
But this is obviously horrendous and despicable, but this is, I think, one of the more gruesome things that happen in the sagas, in the translated sagas. Mm-hmm. But again, usually they are fairly close to what the French says.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that story to take that turn. I thought it was going to be nice. I thought it was going to be like a nice romantic. He can't see her, but he can feel her, and it's going to be this love story. And then he's like, no, actually, he's just a twat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is that love story, ultimately, surely. Apart from that part, but he makes her visible at one point in time, which is obviously a taboo. She placed him under the taboo and says, like, I'm going to wed you, but only if you follow certain rules. And one of the rules were that he is not allowed to see her until, whatever stipulation she puts in place. And he returns back home, and his uncle is like a bishop. And the bishop obviously is like, you have a lover? You can't see you? Devil's work. Here, take this. And in the French, I think he provides him with, I think it was I can't recall how the story goes exactly. I think it was a ring that he gives in the Old French to Partalopi. And in the Old Norse, it suddenly becomes a lantern, or the other way around. It is quite odd. Mm-hmm. But yeah. He makes her visible, taboo is broken, but ultimately they, get together and marry.
Just thinking of the human nature of people, why do I feel like the story is that she's said, you can't see me until we get married, and like we can't do any sexual acts. You can't see me till we get married. Like that's it. And then he's just walked around with his hand in front of his eyes, going, "Well, I can't see you right now, so it doesn't count. I'm just gonna do what I want." And I feel like that's the story. Not that he actually can't see her. It's like that she's put these things in place, and it's been lost maybe to the story to make it a little bit nicer that she's invisible. But really, it's just his like, "Oh yeah, I'm playing the game. I can't see you.
Yeah.
I've got my eyes closed." But
yeah, no. She is really capable of certain magical acts and arts, so she is really invisible.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
She is actually invisible.
She's actually invisible. It's not just like him pretending to not see.
Yeah, that's what I'd like imagine, like him just with his hands over his eyes, just like, "Oh yeah, I can't see you. It's all right. We can still do stuff."
Yeah. I think I recall. It's like the Old Norse says that he outwitted her, if I recall correctly. And
is that what he calls it?
Yeah, this is what the saga calls it. Oh yeah, she has been outwitted by him.
What a shit way to put it.
Yeah.
Okay, is there anything else we need to know about the Night Sagas before we wrap up and let the patrons ask you some questions?
I think I'm ready for the patrons, I would say, right?
Perfect. Yeah, wonderful. Okay. So if for anybody that's listening to the main show, right after this, we do a Q&A with the guest. It's Patreon only. You get that literally just from going over to Patreon/Nordic Mythology podcast. It starts from £3 a month. You get access to watch the shows live. You get all the Q&A episodes we do with every guest, and you get access to the whole back catalog of all the ones we've done. And you can ask guests questions going forward. Obviously, you can submit your questions before the show, or watch it live and ask your questions in real time. And there's also story time with Jonas Lorenz on there. There's a bunch of other things. Please just go check it out. And next week we have Eivor, the singer, on, as well as Alexander Drayman from The Last Kingdom. So they're two giant guests. So if you want to ask them some questions, you can sign up for the Patreon and get to kind of put. I don't know when else you're going to get the chance to ask those two your own questions. So maybe that's a good opportunity to do that, and it will be a fun episode. But right now, Felix is going to answer some questions from the patrons, which, in my opinion, is a better guest.
Oh, thank you.
So as we wrap up, Felix, is there anywhere where people can follow you? Sometimes people want people to follow them, sometimes they don't. I don't know how active you are on social media. Oh
yeah, I'm terrible at that. In fact,
okay.
I have Twitter. I think it was on the posters. It is at Viglundur3 because my cat is called Viglundur.
Oh,
yeah. But other than that, I have Academia, an account there. So if you want to read some of the stuff that I have written and published, you can get most of it for free there. I obviously am also on Facebook.
Wonderful. Yeah, so, perfect. Yeah. Okay, yeah. If you want to follow me, it's Daniel_Farrand1. So somebody still has the other one.
The audacity.
I know. How dare they? How dare they? No, and I've been posting a lot of videos of me wandering around cool places, talking about the history, which has been a lot of fun. And obviously, just horns about it and follow the podcast on all platforms, just at Nordic Mythology Podcast. But yeah, this has been a lot of fun. Like I say, I love episodes where I get to learn something that I've never heard of before.
And I love talking about stuff that I love. So
yeah, there we go.
Win.
That's it, exactly. Okay, let's wrap this up and go and answer some questions.
Right. Yeah, sure.